To me, as the director of IFPRI in those days I was just a simple director, from 75 to 91 or thereabouts, to come to this meeting is an absolutely astonishing experience. I made the statement when I left IFPRI that I knew was wrong at the time, but it was a nice thing to say, that the biggest mistake I made was letting IFPRI get so big. Well, look at this. I was thinking earlier today how to sum up the impressive changes that have gone on at IFPRI since my day. And I think I can sum it up by pointing to this conference that in my day, there's no way in the world that we could have run a conference like this. There are 5 or 6 different elements, none of which we could have matched. We ran a good, simple academic conference in my day, but this is really an extraordinary experience, and I think extremely valuable and worthwhile. I want to make one other historical comment, that I think IFPRI has been blessed by a series of boards that have recognized that an institute like this is, first of all, a research institute, and all the policy outreach and impact and so on is based on the research. And as a result, IFPRI, I would like to include myself in that also, has always had a distinguished researcher as the director or director general of it. And some of the other centers have not been so blessed, and I think it's been quite harmful to them. So I think this is something, a very impressive feature of the boards that IFPRI has had, that my successors have always been solid research people who had some management skills and then built an increasingly substantial institution. I was not supposed to say those kinds of things, but I'm going to say things that will make the people who invited me regret having invited me. I'm supposed to say something about future research agenda, and I have to make this brief. I'm going to do it in 2 parts. I want to make some background comments that everybody, I think, accepts on the basis of IFPRI research, and that is that it is rapid agricultural growth that reduces rural poverty and overall poverty. Nothing else has a significant impact on it. You have palliatives, all the food security stuff and so on that's done, distributing food aid and so on, is very valuable to those people who are receiving it. But the way you solve the poverty problem is through agricultural growth. The other thing that IFPRI research has shown very clearly is how agriculture achieves that reduction in poverty. We not only know that there's an association, we know what causes it and what the mechanisms of that are. And they all come back to the growth rate in agriculture. The other thing that we know is that rapid agricultural growth accelerates the rate of urbanization. It doesn't slow it down, it accelerates it, but it disperses it. You get a dispersed pattern of urbanization as the rising agricultural incomes encourage all sorts of small market town activities, many of which grow and take on a life of their own and are removed from agriculture. Why am I making this point? Because I want to make the point that as we look ahead over the next dozen or so years in research, in the work that IFPRI does, there needs to be a renewed emphasis on getting that agricultural growth rate up. And I want to make 2 or 3 comments here. Number one, CODEP, in which some IFPRI staff played a very important role, is a very significant piece of analysis for Africa, how to get agricultural growth in Africa. And they have a bunch of numbers in CODEP. One of them is that you should achieve a 6% growth rate. That's a pretty sensible growth rate. It's achievable, and it's one that gives you rapid reduction in poverty. In Ethiopia, they've dropped the poverty level in rural areas in half with their 7% growth rate. That's a very impressive, and that's in a 20-year period. That's a very impressive record. And you get another drop in half, and then another drop from that, you begin to get down to something that's manageable on the poverty level. So I want to raise two questions. Each of those has many sub-questions, and there's no time to go into that. The first question is, why, if agriculture is so crucial in reducing the poverty level and is so crucial in diversifying geographically urbanization, why is it that there are so few countries that are achieving better than a 6% growth rate in agriculture? As I've talked to people here who know more about wider areas in Africa than I do, I come to the following conclusion. The only country in Africa, and it's an unsurpassed record in Asia also, that has achieved better than the CODEP growth rate for a 12, 15-year period is Ethiopia. Ghana has had sort of an off and on high growth rate in agriculture, adds up to a fair number of years. There are several other countries, Rwanda is one of them, in which the growth rate looks like it's about to stabilize at a fairly high level. But there are very few countries in Asia or Africa, low-income countries or even middle-income countries, exceeding this 6% growth rate. I think there needs to be research as to why that is. Focus on the growth rate, ask why countries are not getting there. I think if you go around and ask IFPRI people, you'll find out that they cannot answer that question from their existing research programs. They have a lot of speculation about it, but solid research. I want to make a related point, and this will be the end of my remarks. I want to ask a question, and the presumption is that we should be trying to figure out the answer to that. Why is it that in Ethiopia you've had, Otto Nuai referred to a 7% growth rate in fertilizer, but actually the rate over the last several years has been more nearly 10% growth rate. Why have you had a 10% growth rate in fertilizer use in a country which, number one, bans the private sector from distributing fertilizer, and that's supposed to be very important. Number two, the rate of return to fertilizer use on farms is fairly low. There are no subsidies, unlike quite a number of other African countries. There are no subsidies on fertilizer. There's no subsidy on agricultural output. The efficiency of fertilizer use is moderately low. It's obviously sufficiently efficient to make it profitable, or nobody would be using it. So it's profitable, but it's not very profitable. They use the wrong mix of DAP and urea, too much DAP relative to urea. They don't use a side dressing. A few farmers do, but typically they don't. They're not getting very good placement onto the fertilizer. Why is it that with no private sector, with the relatively low return on fertilizer, with no subsidy on fertilizer, they're getting the fastest growth in fertilizer use in Africa, and countries which are acting differently on these things don't? Well, I think the area of inquiry that's needed here is what motivates farmers. Why is it that farmers in Ethiopia are motivated to give a fast growth rate under not particularly favorable conditions on profitability, and farmers in other countries are not willing to do it when they face a somewhat similar profitability at the farm level? We need some research on what motivates farmers. Of course they're interested in making money. Everybody agrees on that. Of course they're interested in profitability. But why is it at a given level of profitability, farmers in some areas will move much more rapidly, follow the leader much more rapidly? That was my last comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.